Welcome to Life Stories. In today's tale, we explore the journey of Maxwell Harrington, a man who prides himself on control and order in his life. But when his son, Ethan, begins dancing with Olivia, the house cook, Maxwell's world is thrown into chaos. As secrets unfold and emotions run deep, Maxwell must confront his own role in his son's life and discover what truly matters. Will he learn to let go and support his son's passion? Stay tuned to uncover the powerful lessons learned along the way. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to begin the story today. Maxwell Harrington had always prided himself on his control. He ran a vast business empire, a sprawling estate, and maintained a life so meticulously organized that it seemed almost mechanical. Every moment of every day was scheduled, from board meetings at dawn to quiet evenings spent reading in his study. His existence was one of purpose and predictability. There was no room for surprises. No room for anything out of place. Everything was where it was meant to be. His house was a reflection of that control. The grand corridors of his estate were spotless. Each room arranged precisely as it should be, with every object having its place. Even the servants, who worked diligently in the background, played their roles with precision. They didn't intrude on his carefully constructed world. And his son, Ethan, had become part of that order. After the passing of his wife, Ethan had grown into a reserved, almost stoic young man. He followed the routines Maxwell had set out for him, often retreating into books or activities that required little interaction with the world. It seemed the loss of his mother had sealed him off from the rest of the world. A world Maxwell had spent years building and protecting. But then one afternoon, everything changed. I was walking through the grand corridors of the estate, my mind running over the events of the day, when something outside caught my eye. I paused. Through the wide glass windows that overlooked the garden, I saw Ethan. He was moving, but not in any way I had ever seen before. He was dancing. I blinked, convinced that my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was Ethan, my son. No longer the silent boy he had become after his mother's passing, but a boy smiling, laughing, and dancing in the grass. Yet, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, guiding him with graceful movements, was Olivia. She had worked for us for the last 6 months, hired as a cook, and until that moment, I had barely paid attention to her. She was just another employee in the house, doing her job without ever stepping out of line. But there they were, moving in perfect harmony. Ethan, with his hesitant, unsteady steps, yet filled with an unusual concentration. And Olivia, guiding him with an elegance I never knew she possessed. She moved like someone who had been trained in the art of movement. Not simply indulging a child's whim but teaching him. The way she led him. Her every step precise, deliberate. It wasn't the playful improvisation of a house cook, but the execution of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I felt a tightness in my chest, a cold unease creeping up on me. I didn't like what I was seeing. My son, my flesh and blood, was learning something from someone I had considered nothing more than a servant. And worse yet, it seemed to be affecting him. I had always thought that as long as I provided stability and security, Ethan would be fine. But this felt wrong. I could see the joy in his face. The kind of joy I hadn't seen in years. It was genuine, a carefree laugh escaping his lips as he stumbled, trying to get the moves right. That laugh, it made my heart ache. Since his mother died, he had closed himself off from the world, retreating into a shell. He had become a boy who was afraid to feel, afraid to show any vulnerability. Yet here he was, smiling because of her. Olivia's movements were graceful, precise, but there was something else there. As I stood watching, I realized I had never really looked at her before. There was something in the way she guided Ethan, something in her eyes as she corrected him, something that spoke of a deeper story, a story I didn't know. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out into the garden, my footsteps sharp against the stone path, my mind a whirl of confusion and irritation. As I approached, Ethan froze, his earlier joy slipping into apprehension. He lowered his head, looking at the ground as if ashamed. Olivia, however, remained composed, wiping her hands on her apron before straightening up and meeting my gaze. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice cool, controlled, but beneath the surface, there was a growing frustration I couldn't quite explain. "We were practicing, Senor," Olivia replied simply, her voice calm, yet firm. "Practicing what exactly?" I demanded, turning my attention to Ethan. He hesitated for a moment, then quietly said, "I wanted to learn how to dance." "Since when?" The words stung more than I expected. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing that my son had been carrying something I hadn't seen, something I hadn't bothered to notice. "A while now," he said quietly, almost as if unsure of himself. And that's when it hit me. I had never asked. I had never been curious enough to ask how my son was doing, what he was feeling. I had assumed that by providing the material things he needed, the things he should have wanted, he would be fine, but I had been blind to the emotional void he had been living in. My gaze shifted back to Olivia, my irritation growing. "This isn't your job," I said harshly. "Why are you doing this?" She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Because he asked me to," she said, her voice steady and calm. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something, to explain, but he just shrugged his shoulders. A small gesture that spoke volumes. I was lost for words. What was I supposed to say to this? That it was inappropriate for the cook to teach my son to dance? That my son shouldn't be smiling or laughing because of her? No, I couldn't say that. Deep down, I knew I was being unreasonable. But my discomfort grew. I turned back to Olivia. "I need to speak with you. Alone." As I walked back into the house, I glanced over my shoulder. I saw Ethan lean toward Olivia, whispering something in her ear. She nodded in response, and for the first time, I noticed the small smile on my son's face. It was as if they were in on something. Something I didn't fully understand. Something that filled me with both unease and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. I needed to uncover the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Olivia than met the eye. And I was determined to find out. After leaving Ethan and Olivia in the garden, my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something I wasn't seeing. I walked back into my office, trying to push the thoughts aside. But they wouldn't leave. I had always prided myself on being in control, on knowing everything that went on in my household. But this situation felt like a crack in my armor. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing screen of my computer, my fingers steepled beneath my chin. I didn't like mysteries. I never had. In my business, there was no room for uncertainty. You either knew everything about your competitors, your partners, your employees, or you didn't survive. So I decided to apply the same principle here. I typed Olivia's name into a search engine, hoping to uncover something, anything, that could explain the connection I had just witnessed between her and my son. At first, the search results seemed mundane, just typical information about a house cook. Nothing that stood out. But then, buried beneath the usual articles, I found something that made my blood run cold. A news article from 7 years ago. The headline read, "Young ballet prodigy disappears from the stage without explanation." I clicked on the link, my pulse quickening. As the page loaded, a picture of a much younger Olivia appeared. She was dressed in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, arms lifted in perfect form. Her expression was serene, confident, everything she was not now. The article spoke of a rising star in the ballet world, someone with an unmatched gift, someone who had performed in prestigious theaters across the globe. She had been on the brink of an international career when, without warning, she vanished from the spotlight. There were no scandals, no explanations, just a sudden disappearance. She left everything behind, and no one knew why. I sat back in my chair, exhaling sharply. Why would someone with that kind of talent simply give it all up? How did she go from being a ballet prodigy to working as a cook in my home? The questions piled up, but none of them made sense. I had to know more. My instincts had never failed me before in business. And now they were screaming at me that there was more to Olivia than I had ever realized. I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after seeing how much influence she seemed to have over Ethan. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor as I grabbed my phone. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by simply staring at a screen. I had to hear the truth from her. I made my way to the kitchen, my thoughts churning. Olivia was there, as expected, methodically cleaning the countertops. When I entered, she glanced up, her expression neutral but guarded. "Senor Harrington," she greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Is there something you need?" I didn't waste time. I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it on the counter in front of her. The article about her displayed on the screen. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. For the first time since I had met her, I saw genuine surprise flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at the screen, then back at me, as though weighing her next words carefully. "You've been searching for me," she said quietly, her voice calm but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. A mixture of caution and resignation. Perhaps. I folded my arms across my chest, trying to remain calm, though my mind was racing. "I don't like mysteries in my home, Olivia," she sighed, placing the dish towel down on the counter. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. But then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I suppose I should have expected this," she said softly. "You're not the type of man to let things go unanswered." I didn't reply. I just waited for her to continue. She glanced at the article again, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter. "I was a dancer," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "A long time ago." "You were more than just a dancer," I corrected, my voice sharp. "You were a star." A bitter smile touched her lips. "A star that burned out before it could shine," she said quietly. I studied her, trying to understand. "Why did you leave?" I asked. She hesitated, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. The battle between wanting to protect herself and the need to explain. Finally, she sighed deeply and spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Because I lost everything." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken pain. I waited for her to continue, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a sadness that was impossible to ignore. "When I was 22, she began, dance was my entire world. It was all I knew, all I cared about. I trained endlessly, pushing myself beyond my limits, because I believed I was meant for something greater." She paused, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But I wasn't alone. My fiancé, Adrian, he was a dancer too. We had trained together since we were children. We were supposed to take on the world together. We were offered an international tour, something we had worked for our entire lives. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I listened. I knew where this was going. "The day before our biggest performance," she continued, her voice breaking slightly, "Adrian was hit by a car." She swallowed, her eyes unfocused. "He died instantly." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. I sat silently, not knowing what to say. What could I say? "I couldn't dance after that," she whispered. "I couldn't even hear music without feeling like a part of me had been ripped away. Everything I had built my life around was gone. And so I disappeared." I was silent for a long moment, letting her words settle. I had expected something tragic, but not this. I hadn't realized the depth of her loss. "So you became a cook," I said, trying to understand. She let out a soft, humorless breath. I needed something far removed from dance. Something practical, something safe. I nodded slowly, but there was still so much I didn't understand. "And now you teach my son?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her expression softened, and for the first time, I saw something like compassion in her eyes. "Because he reminds me of myself," she said simply. A chill ran down my spine. "How?" "Because he doesn't smile, Senor Harrington," she said softly. "He's closed off, like I was at his age." Her words hit me harder than I had expected. It was like a mirror being held up to my own actions. I had spent so much time ensuring that Ethan had everything he needed, that he lacked for nothing. But what I hadn't given him, what I hadn't even realized he needed, was the chance to truly feel, to express himself. She paused, her gaze never leaving mine. I think he just needed someone to listen. I sat in silence, absorbing Olivia's words. They echoed in my mind, reverberating through me like the sound of a bell tolling. I think he just needed someone to listen. Those words kept repeating over and over, making me question everything I thought I knew about my son. For years, I had been so focused on providing Ethan with stability, security, and material things that I had overlooked the one thing that truly mattered, the ability to feel. To experience life fully, with joy and sorrow, with passion and pain. I had been so determined to control every aspect of his life that I had failed to see how trapped he had become in his own silence. I glanced up at Olivia, a sense of realization dawning on me. In some strange way, she had helped Ethan more than I ever had. Even though I had given him everything he could possibly want, I had failed to give him what he truly needed. And now, it seemed that Olivia was the one who had been able to provide that. It wasn't just dancing. It wasn't about the moves or the routine. It was about Ethan expressing himself in a way he hadn't been able to before. Dance was a language, a way of communicating that went beyond words. Ethan had been unable to speak his emotions, his fears, his desires, and through dancing, he found a way to do so. Olivia had given him the space and guidance to explore that part of himself. And I had been too blind to see it. I stood up abruptly, the realization settling in my chest like a weight. I had to change. I had to support my son. Not just with the things I thought he needed, but with the things that truly mattered. I couldn't keep sheltering him from life's challenges, from the emotions that made him human. I had to let him feel. Let him live. The following weeks were a blur. Ethan began practicing with Olivia more often, and I watched from the sidelines. My heart a mixture of pride and fear. I was proud of how far he had come, proud of the determination and resilience he was showing. But I was also scared. I had never let him take risks before. I had always kept him safe, kept him within the boundaries of what was comfortable and predictable. But now, I could see he was ready to step beyond those boundaries, ready to face challenges that I had never prepared him for. One evening, as the day drew to a close and the sun began to dip below the horizon, Ethan came to me with a quiet determination in his eyes. He stood in front of me, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. I could see that he was gathering the courage to speak. And I waited. "I want to compete in a dance tournament," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a wave. I had never expected him to ask for something like this. Dance was one thing, but competition? It was different. It was a world full of pressure, of expectations. A world I wasn't sure Ethan was ready for. A dance tournament? I repeated, my voice sharp as I tried to process what he was asking. Ethan nodded, standing tall now, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "Yes, I want to compete. I've been practicing with Olivia, and she thinks I'm ready." The words stung. Olivia again. But this time, I didn't feel the same irritation. I felt something else, something close to admiration. She had helped my son find something inside himself that I hadn't even known was there. I took a deep breath, considering his words. "You realize this isn't just about fun. Competitions aren't games, Ethan. They're about discipline, pressure, and expectations." "I know," he replied, his voice steady, "but I'm ready for it." For the first time in a long while, I truly looked at him. I saw not the quiet, reserved boy who had retreated into himself but a young man filled with purpose, with resolve. His eyes were bright with a fire I hadn't seen before. He was determined. He wasn't afraid to take the next step. And for the first time, I felt something stirring inside me. Pride, yes, but also a deep sense of responsibility. I had to be there for him. I had to support him in this, no matter how hard it was for me to let go. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "But if you're going to do this, you do it properly. No half measures. You commit to it fully." Ethan's face lit up with a grin that was so wide and genuine it nearly knocked the breath out of me. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice full of gratitude. As he turned to leave, I watched him go with a mixture of emotions flooding through me. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, something I hadn't expected to feel. Something that had been buried under years of control, of schedules and expectations. Later that evening, I found Olivia in the kitchen, preparing dinner as usual. She glanced up when I entered, sensing immediately why I was there. "You knew he would ask me, didn't you?" I said, folding my arms as I leaned against the doorframe. She wiped her hands on a dish towel before turning to face me. "I suspected," she said quietly. "Do you think he's ready?" I paused, considering her question carefully. "He has the passion, the drive, but he will need discipline. And he'll need support." Olivia nodded, her gaze steady. "He has the passion, the rest will come with time." "I'm not worried about the rest," I said, a sense of calm washing over me. "I'm worried about him facing failure. Rejection. He may not be able to handle it." Olivia studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Or maybe you're the one who isn't ready to handle it," she said softly. Her words hit me harder than I expected. But I didn't argue. Instead, I just nodded slowly, accepting the truth. I wasn't ready to see Ethan face rejection. I wasn't ready for him to fail. But I had to let him. He had to experience life, even in its most painful moments, to truly grow. "If we do this," I said, "we do it right. He needs to be pushed. No soft encouragements. He needs to know that if he's going to compete, he has to commit." Olivia's lips curled slightly, a knowing smile in her eyes. I wasn't planning on going easy on him. And with that, I knew, this wasn't just about Ethan's journey, it was about my own. It was about letting go. About allowing him to grow. To face challenges that would shape him into someone stronger. And it was about learning to be the father he needed, not the one I had been. As the days passed and the tournament approached, Ethan's dedication to his craft grew stronger. I watched as he poured his heart into every practice, pushing himself harder than I had ever seen. There was a new fire in him, a determination that was contagious. I found myself watching him with admiration, feeling proud of the young man he was becoming. He wasn't just learning to dance, he was learning to overcome, to grow, and to face his fears. The day of the tournament arrived, and I stood backstage, watching as he prepared for the performance. He was nervous, his hands trembling slightly, but there was something different in his eyes, a quiet confidence. He was no longer the quiet, reserved boy who hid behind books and routines. He was a young man ready to step into the world, to face challenges head-on, and to make his own way. As Ethan took the stage, I held my breath, watching him dance with all the passion he had put into every practice. It wasn't about winning, it was about showing himself, expressing everything he had learned. When the applause erupted at the end of his performance, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I knew, deep down, that this moment would stay with him forever, that he had found something deeper within himself. Later, as we walked toward the car, Ethan looked at me, his eyes bright with pride. "Can I keep training, Dad?" he asked. I smiled, a genuine smile that came from a place of understanding. "Of course, son. We're just getting started." And as we walked away, I realized that the journey wasn't about the destination, it was about the growth, the lessons, and the courage to face life's challenges. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more life stories.